Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today is a different video, but I felt like I really need to talk about it. If you're new to my channel, you probably don't know much about me. I'm Leah. I live in the UK, and I'm married to a wonderful person called Claire. I've shared my life on the internet for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe on YouTube or via a blog. And I have spoken about a lot of things. So I felt like I needed to bring you a bit of an update on what's been going on in my life. There's been stuff that I couldn't talk about. There's been lots of stuff that has just been very difficult, but I bring this to you as a cautionary tale. So I've got my water here. It's very warm outside. If you are wanting to watch this, I suggest pausing the video now to go and make yourself a cup of tea. It is going to be a long story. So, as I say, I'm Leah, and I recently lost my mum, which I've spoken about on the channel. I also spoke about on the channel that my mum was looking for a kidney donor, and we were struggling to find a live donor for her. That was on the channel. It was serious, so we knew that she was poorly, and we knew her time was limited. When I was 15, my dad passed away. I've spoken about this before. I'll link the video below. I spoke about bereavement. My dad passed away from quite a rare illness called sarcoidosis. I won't go too much into that because I have spoken about it. So it was just me, my mum and my brother for a long time. My brother moved to the States when he was quite young, about 19 or 20 years old. And he's lived there for the last 12 years or so. He's married, and his first marriage, his wife passed away, which was devastating. Second marriage, still going strong, and they have a little boy. You will have seen him on my channel, maybe on some videos. You may have seen some photos on Instagram previously, or if you're a friend on Facebook, you will have seen my little nephew. Absolutely adore him. They live in the States still. So it was just us three for quite a while when my dad passed away. A couple of years after my dad passed away, the internet sort of blew up just after my dad dad passed away. It was a very interesting time because we were able to be one of the first families on our street to have internet, and it was great. It was great fun. I mean, it was dial-up, and kids, if you're watching this, you'll never appreciate the speed of the internet until you've had to use dial-up and that awful noise that it used to make. But yeah, so we used to sit and wait and look at web pages, and people were becoming millionaires by selling pixels, and it was a crazy time. The internet blew up, and chat rooms were blowing up, and internet dating was blowing up, and all this stuff was going on. And me and my mum and my brother because it cost quite a lot to actually use the internet. So we used to have an hour a night each that we were allowed to have. My brother was the first hour, I was the second. My mum could have whatever she wanted. It was her household. One computer in the house. No mobile phones, or was there? We might have had a mobile phone. I was about 17. I was nearly 17 when my mum met somebody on the internet, and he was a lot younger than her, and he seemed to be quite friendly, and he basically just came into our lives. I was 16, nearly 17. My brother would have only been 13, so quite young. Very quickly he moved into our family home, and although you know, it's quite difficult to adjust to something like that when you're used to somebody. But our mother's happiness was really paramount. And it became quite obvious that he wasn't, he was a very clever person, but he wasn't very capable in terms of work. He was 25 and I was only nearly 17. So there's about 9 years difference between us. But he was 21 years younger than my mum, which is fine. I think you can find love anywhere with whoever. So they hit it off, and for about a year, maybe a year and a half, they lived in the family home. And then my mum decided that she would move north. Her family are all in the northeast, and she wanted to be a little bit closer, but she wasn't ready to move back to the northeast. So she moved to the East Midlands, and I stayed in our hometown down south, mainly because I met someone, I was living with them, and it was all new. And I mean, that's another story altogether. But, you know, everything was fine. He didn't work. My mum basically felt that she had a companion and he didn't need to work. She had a house and she didn't need to work as much. She had the, you know, my dad's inheritance. She got a widow's pension. And so he stayed with us. We moved back up to Leicester because that's where his family were, and that was fine. I had no attachment to Stevenage anymore, which is where I was from. I had a few friends there. Of course, I still have friends that I speak to all the time, but it was possible to do that. You know, mobile phones were just sort of happening, and in the end, I ended up moving up to the East Midlands as well. So, Mum bought a house. It had a room that I could move into. My brother had a room, and her new partner had one. For 18 years, they lived in a harmonious coupling where he was her companion. She was just happy. They had a very good relationship in the sense that, they were very independent of each other. They led very separate lives in the home. He suffered from agoraphobia and anxiety. Mental health aside, he was very clever, but he also wasn't worldly wise. And the older I got, the harder it was to see somebody not working and living off my mum, where I was struggling, and I struggled so much. I mean, there were times where I was living off rice and ketchup because I couldn't afford to live, and I would never have asked my mum for money. Not once would I have asked her, because I just felt that I was old enough to stand on my own 2 feet. And although there were a number of times I had to move home because I had no money, I would rather have lived with no money than not move back. That was even when I moved back, I paid rent. Whereas, I mean, you know, any money that he had from his benefits went to my mum, which is fine. But it was hard. It was hard to see. But at the same time, he was one of us, you know, he was part of our family, to the point where we bought each other gifts at Christmas, and he was always there, and it was fine. He was quite a secretive person though, and I always felt like he didn't really consider us as family. He never went to any of our family events. He didn't do anything with us. I mean, it was just a very bizarre relationship, but he made my mum happy, and that's all that mattered. She had lost her husband quite early in life, and I know that I think she very much had a barrier up and never wanted to be in that situation again. And so they were companions, and that was fine. They lived together. However, in 2014, I had a call from my mum, and she was really worried because her partner, who had agoraphobia and anxiety, had left the house, not left a note, not got his mobile on, and it really worried her. And she was beside herself. She was worried. He kept saying that he didn't love life, he didn't want to live. That was something he always said. You know, Mum used to be really angry about that, because one thing she loved was life, and she used to get frustrated with him saying that life was not valuable. So she felt like he may have gone and done something. So I went round, and my brother's in the States. I just met Claire. It was only a few months into meeting Claire. And I went to the house, and she was frantic looking for him. She rang the police, and they said, there's nothing we can do. She did say he was vulnerable, and they said, look, can you have a look and see if he's left any clues? And he'd left a laptop on the dining room table. So I decided that I would see if it was unlocked, which it was, because he didn't lock his computer. And I had a look on his search history, and I found a B&B in Lincolnshire. So I thought, okay, well, at least we might know where he is. My mum rang the number on the B&B, for the B&B, and she let the local police know, and they also went round, and he was there. They checked on him, he was absolutely fine, and he just wanted to come home. So they were bringing him back, and they managed to bring him back to the house, and my mum felt a bit better. However, in the meantime, I had found on the computer some letters that looked like suicide notes, quite lengthy ones though, and they were addressed to somebody, a different name, not to my mum, to another woman and her son. And there was also last wishes, which were detailing what he wanted to do and what his will had in it. And my mum and me and my brother weren't even factored into that. It transpired that he had been having an affair. When my mum had gone to America to see my brother get married, he had this other woman at the house, in their room, in their home. He had fallen in love with someone else. And my mum's quite broad-minded. She's quite open-minded. She was very, I think what she was so angry about was that he'd lied to her. If he'd have said, you know, we're just companions, I want to meet somebody else, or I've met somebody else, then Mum would have been absolutely fine with it, because she wasn't in love with him like she was my dad, and she could cope with that. She was happy. They could have just carried on as friends, and she wouldn't have been bothered, but it was the lies. She was devastated. So I sent myself all this information, the letters, the last wishes, and as much as I could, I sent an email to myself, because I was furious. I felt like I was the only one that knew this apart from my mum. I was fuming that he had done this. My mum found out who this person was. She found out a number for her. She had a big conversation with her. It turns out that although my mum's partner at the time was said they'd had this 2-year relationship in his head, it transpires that actually it didn't last 2 years, and he was infatuated with this person. And I don't know how long it was, but the infatuation was 2 years at least, according to what was in these notes. So this woman was like, he's obsessed with me, I've called the police, I'm getting married, and he needs to leave me alone. And it turns out that she had it got engaged to somebody else, and that was the reason that he had tried to not kill himself, because he actually didn't do anything at this point. A few days later, he did take an overdose at my mum's house, and my mum was furious. She always said to him, you know, I get that you don't value life, but don't ever think about doing it in my home. And I totally get that. You know, she's not a fool. And I think the amount of times that he threatened to kill himself, actually he never did. And he didn't even succeed on the time that he did try. And, you know, every time my mum used to speak to me, she used to say, you know, he's always said that if I die, he's going to kill himself. And that was you know, always something that really worried me. You know, my mum was, at the time she wasn't unwell when she used to tell me this, but then afterwards she used to say it as well. And when she got sick a few times, and I used to be like, well, that's not great, because if you pass away, I'm going to have to deal with somebody else as well. It's really, what am I supposed to do about that? But she was adamant that that wouldn't happen. So once he'd made this attempt on his life, she decided that that was enough, and she kicked him out. And she was just angry because she'd asked him never to do that, never to put him in that position. She also, you know, was furious that he'd cheated on her. She felt so betrayed. The more she thought about it, you know, the more angry she was. So she told him to leave, and he did. And for around 5 months, he was not in the home. He begged her constantly. He was sending a message, and I know this because I've seen all the texts since she's passed away. He just needed to be back in the house and realised how lucky he had it. And I just wasn't happy. But then Mum got really sick, and so much so that she really needed help, and I couldn't be there. Like, I moved in with my wife. I can't just drop everything, my life, my work, and I would have done if she'd been on her own. It would have been very different, but she felt that enough time had passed, and that he was a good enough friend, despite everything that he'd done, that he could come back as a lodger. He had asked, she'd said no originally, and then she thought, you know what, it benefits us both. He gets his home back, I get my somebody to look after me, and this is a good position. I trust him to look after me, and she felt like she could trust him with other things as well. Fast forward 3 years, and Mum passes away, and, you know, gratefully he looked after her. And despite what I'm going to tell you next, I will be forever grateful for him looking after her for that time. She enjoyed the last 3 years of her life to whatever she could. I'm gutted that she's not here. Anyway, Mum passes away, and a month before she passed away, I was terrified. I kept saying to her, I'm not sure I trust him. I don't feel like, I said, I've got a few things that are really putting me on edge. One is that he said he was going to kill himself. If you die, am I going to have to deal with that? What am I going to do? 2, what if he makes things difficult? What if he doesn't even tell me that you've passed away? And I felt like he wouldn't. My biggest fear was that he would squirrel it away or hide her in her bedroom and let her just fester there and never tell me. Like, I was so terrified. I knew she was sick. I didn't know when it was going to happen. And I was so scared that I was going to have to deal with more. His illness and his secretiveness and his ability to lie for so long frightened me. And so I expressed that to my mum, and there were lots of things that, you know, we spoke about, and I think she didn't ever really want to die, so we didn't go into too much depth about what she wanted, but there were a few things I knew. Number one, she wanted to be buried with my dad. She'd bought the plot when he passed away, and we knew that that was what she wanted. And number 2 was that both myself and my brother were the beneficiaries of the will, and she made it very clear. She told me where it was, and she gave me access to everything that I needed to know. But it was always light-hearted, because you don't, and I would say this to you, even if your parents are not sick, or even if your family members are not sick, make it very clear what you want, because you could die tomorrow. And I hate that to be morbid, but life is so short and precious. So just make sure you at least tell somebody. And I also would advise making a will, which we are in the process of doing. However, the will was read. Everything was clear. She made it in 2001. She had been dating this guy for nearly 4 years, so they're well into their relationship, but it was very clear that she had provided for me and my brother. And even though all that was, the other thing is she had a very, very large mortgage. So David and I knew this, my brother, and I spoke to him a few times and said, if things progress that we don't want them to, then I think we're going to have to we have to have a plan. And I think you always have to have a plan. So Mum passed away and we started sorting everything out, and her ex, who was now a lodger, was very upset. And I get it, they were friends. Devastated. Everything was about him. We were grieving children. Whether we were in our 30s or not, we were devastated. And he was just sobbing constantly and just craving attention. And it was a hard slog. It was so difficult. The thing that I kept thinking was, I know that he has said that he will kill himself. And I want to be able to make sure that I give him enough space to process what's going on, but also to understand that we have to sell that house. My mum's house is a 3-bedroom semi-detached, and she had a mortgage that was almost half of its value. So we knew that it would need to be paid off. The first thing I did was ring the mortgage company, and they said, we've frozen it for 12 months. So we knew we had 12 months, but it could take 12 months to sell a house. My brother wasn't going to be here. He had to go back to work. He had to go back to the States. He had to go back to his family. So we were keen to get the wills in motion, keen to get probate, and keen to get the house on the market. It was devastating. I mean, we were ruthless. We got rid of so much which we didn't need to, but we just we didn't have time. So the deal was that Mum passed away in November. It was very close to Christmas. Her funeral was in the December, and we felt like to throw somebody out of their home that they'd been in, even though they weren't together, it was still where he was lodging. He had his separate room to my mum's. And he, even though he didn't own anything, had no stake in the house, he'd never really contributed to it, it would have been very mean to just chuck him out. I mean, that is not who we are. So it was also a bit of a shock that after the new year, we spent time clearing the house out, which was always the plan. And he pulled us to one side in early February and said that he'd been to a solicitor's, and I couldn't quite work out why. We were just about to put the house on the market. We were literally having the photos taken. We had cleared the house completely, all with his help. Everything we did, he was drunk every time at like 10 in the morning. Everything was done with his help. And so, for us, it was a bit of a shock when suddenly this person who was seemingly, up until this point, just a miserable wreck, just turned cold and said that he had, that my mum had said that she was going to change her will, which would never have happened. We were speaking to her literally the day before she passed away. She was compos mentis the whole time. She is a very pragmatic woman. She would have done it if she'd wanted to, and we would have carried out those wishes. She didn't do that. And that they were having a sexual relationship. Again, it wasn't true. They lived in separate rooms. It never happened. And even if it were true, there was no proof. How could he prove that? But as far as we were concerned, that was not true. He'd obviously been doing some reading, and essentially you can contest a will or put in what is known as an Inheritance Act claim if you were a dependent and partner for the last 2 years, and you would have to prove that. And suddenly he had made this bold move to go to a solicitor's. The first thing, I reacted I was grieving my mother. I'm clearing her house, the home that we shared. And the first reaction was, I can't believe you're doing this. Why couldn't you have spoken to us? Like, it was insulting. Why was there no consultation? Was there no sit down? Was there no request? Essentially, his whole motive was not to leave the house. He did not want to leave the house, but he couldn't pay that mortgage, and he couldn't buy the house, even though he had some inheritance from his dad passing away in the year before, which, if he'd have been smart, he would have put that towards the house and then had a stake in it. He's not. He may be clever and intelligent, but he's not smart. So it was a shock, and it was devastating. It was a devastating blow, and I thought, what is going on? I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was already so upset. We've lost both of our parents at this point, and this man was creating an issue where there could have been no issue. We made it really clear that if he attempted to take us to court, that we would respond in kind, that we would go to a solicitor's, and we would fight him all the way. And it was just such a shock. I didn't sleep for days. I was researching and reading and finding all this information. I was just going through everything I could to find anything to stop this man. It was never about the money. What really upset me was that he was calling my mum a liar. He had ruined everything. It was just such a devastating time, and it was ruined by this man who was, out of greed, trying to get a little bit of extra money out of the person who he'd been sponging off for the last 20 years. It was just so horrible, and something that if my mum had been alive, she would have been so angry. She would have been furious. I was angry. My brother was angry. My wife was angry. The whole family was devastated. Like, why would you do that to somebody's family? And what I kept questioning was, you loved this woman, or you're claiming to be in a relationship with this woman, and then you're going against her wishes. So number one, that doesn't feel right. Number two, you were claiming housing benefit to pay as a lodger. If you were together, that would have been fraud. There was just so much that was... There were so many discrepancies in his argument, and I just couldn't believe he was doing it. So it cost us a lot of money to get him out of the house. We never asked him for rent, but he never ever paid it anyway. And we realised that was the best thing to do. So if you are going through this, and do not let the lodger that is living in your deceased family relative's house stay there paying rent, because then they become a tenant, and it takes months and months and months to get them out. Based on what happened, he didn't pay, and he was so secretive. He kept flittering away letters of my mum's, and he took her purse. That was the other thing. He took her purse and hid it. It had all her stuff in, and it had all her cards in, and he took it. And not only did he hide it, he didn't hide it at the house. He hid it at his auntie's house. He didn't... he was a sick individual, and he made my life hell. For months, this toing and froing went from our solicitors to his, and his argument was he offered my mum a kidney once, didn't go through with it. He was in love with her for the whole time they were together, but he doesn't mention his affair. He was, you know, apparently this good, solid person, where we found out that just after my mum's funeral, he had been very inappropriate to an extremely ill and vulnerable neighbour and sent some very truly disturbing sexual messages to her, which we now know were reported to the police. There were lots of things that this man was, one of which is a disgusting predator, and also somebody who was just clearly so wrapped up in his need for more money, even though he had enough to keep him after his dad's passing. If you're thinking he received benefits, he can't have all that money, he receives contribution-based ESA, which if you are claiming contribution-based ESA, you can have as much savings as you want. It doesn't go against you. So of course we looked everything up. I mean, I researched so much. I feel like I could expertly know about this act after reading everything, and everything I read was just, it was terrifying, because there were people who had been in a similar situation, but they were losing every time. And I thought, wait, there's got to be a reason why we're not going to win, we're not going to lose. And a lot of it was to do with his character, his motives, his discrepancies in his arguments, his lies. There was lies throughout, and also just how his misdemeanors really after Mum died. And it was just truly horrific. And last week, I said on my Instagram, and I've already posted this elsewhere, we got to the 6-month mark. So with the Inheritance Act, once you are granted probate, so the will has to go through something called probate. Once you are granted probate, anybody who wants to make a claim against the Inheritance Act has 6 months to the day to proceed with court, proceed through a court. And they have to issue proceedings, and then you've got up to 2 years and £100,000 worth of fees if it goes to court. We were willing to go that far. We were willing to push it that far because we knew the truth, and we knew that so far already the arguments had been flawed. I don't think there would have been any barrister willing to take his case. It would have been dropped at any point possible. I mean, even down to the fact that he was claiming housing benefit and living with Mum and paying her as a lodger, that would have completely just thrown everything out. He was either defrauding the DWP or defrauding the housing benefit, or either way he was defrauding somebody, so that it had to stop. So I think that just would have been thrown out. But we spent an awful lot of money just to eventually find out that he was dropping it, and they didn't tell us for months. It took months and months until that 6 months had gone. And effectively, we were given the all clear last week that he decided he was going to drop the case because he wanted to put it behind him. And I thought, well, that's great. I'm so pleased for you that you want to put this behind you. And it was just unnecessary, the whole thing. And I guess this is a real cautionary tale, because you just never know how people are going to react after somebody dies, and what they would be willing to do to try and get their mitts on a few measly quid. We are going to put this behind us. I am blocking that person from my life forever. He didn't just lose my mum that day. Whether he was in love with her or not, he lost everybody. He lost a ready-made family, of which he doesn't have. He lost any friends that may have been friends with them both, although there weren't many, because he didn't make an effort, but he tried to. He contacted a lot of my mum's friends after she passed away, and initially they were trying to be supportive because he seemed extremely upset. But in the end, they realised that he was trying to manipulate them, especially when they found out that he was doing to us. He felt that it was all me, making this issue, that I had created this problem for him, whereas me and my brother were completely on the same page. There was endless phone calls to friends and family, and there was endless sleepless nights, and he just stole everything. He stole our mother's memory for a short time. He stole that moment of grief. And I'll never ever forget how awful that was. But I don't believe in feeling bitter, and I don't believe in revenge. I don't want to make him a victim, because then he gets all of that sort of attention that he craves. He has to live with what he did, and he eventually will have his comeuppance, because karma to me is real. And as far as I'm concerned, I can move on with my life. I'm just so sad. I'm so sad that it came to this. I'm so sad for her that she isn't here. I'm so sad for us, for everything that happened. I'm sad that this has been so difficult, but I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful for my wonderful wife, who has, oh God, she's been so amazing. My family. And everybody who helped. And I'm sort of grateful for having a community that I can share things with, and I'm grateful for being able to speak openly about it, because I think this is one of those things that I hope nobody ever has to go through it, but if you do, I suppose my advice would be getting a really good lawyer. And just make sure that you think about what's worth fighting for, because we were told on a number of occasions to go to mediation and give him a few grand. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do that, because that was admitting something, and it wasn't true. It wasn't true. But it's just one of those life lessons that we had to learn very quickly, that people are awful sometimes, but only one, because there are many people out there who are wonderful, and it made it so clear who they were. So that is really it. That is the video. I know this is a really long video, and I appreciate that it's going to be a tough watch, so I think I might split it into two. I'm not sure. It's probably going to be quite a long video, and people are just going to have to maybe break it up into two themselves, watch one half then the other. But I will keep comments on. I will read them and review them, and I'll respond. I'm not making this video for any other reason than a cautionary tale, as I've said before, just to be aware that these things can happen. Not all people are good humans, and that we're okay now and things are going well, and that we can move forward. So thank you for watching it. Give it a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. I'm going to give it a thumbs down if you haven't. I don't mind. I haven't got enough of a following for it to matter whether you put thumbs up or down. Subscribe if you haven't already. This isn't the content I normally put out, but like I said at the beginning, I share a lot with you guys, and if you've got anything that you want me to make a video on, then please comment below. Happy to discuss. I hope you are all well, enjoying your back holiday, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.